Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Our conference will momentarily. Please continue to hold. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and please continue to hold. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Culturally Competent Direct Care Meeting, the LTSS Needs of Diverse Dually Eligible Beneficiaries. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later there will be a question-and-answer session. Instructions will be given at that time. If you should require assistance during today's call, please press star then 0. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded. Now I turn the conference over to your host, Alana Noir. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Alana Noor. I'm with the Lewin Group. Welcome to the webinar, Culturally Competent Direct Care, Meeting the LTSS Needs of Diverse Dually Eligible Beneficiaries. Today's session will include a presenter-led discussion, a panel discussion, and a Q&A discussion among the presenters and participants. This session will be recorded, and a video replay and copy of today's slides will be available at resourcesforintegratedcare.com. The audio portion of the presentation will automatically stream through your computer. Phone lines for this presentation are also available. To access the number, click the black phone widget at the bottom of your screen. Continuing education credits are available and no additional cost to participants. AGS is accredited by the California Board of Registered Nursing to provide continuing education. AGS is also accredited by the National Association of Social Workers to provide continuing education for social workers. CMS is accredited by IACET to issue CEUs. We strongly encourage you to check with your specific regulatory board or other agency to confirm that courses taken from these accrediting bodies will be accepted by that entity. You'll see on this slide that we've laid out the various continuing education credit options. For both social workers and nurses, you can obtain continuing education credit if you complete the pretest at the beginning of the webinar and the post-test. CMS is also offering CEUs for other individuals looking to obtain credit for attending this webinar. In order to obtain these credits, you must complete the post-test through CMS's learning management system. Additional guidance about obtaining credits and accessing the links to the pre- and post-test can be found within the Continuing Education Credit Guide in the resource list on the left-hand side of your screen or at the Resources for Integrated Care website. This website is supported through the Medicare and Medicaid Coordination Office at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. MMCO is helping beneficiaries dually eligible for Medicare and Medicaid have access to seamless, high-quality health care that includes the full range of covered services in both programs. To learn more about current efforts and resources, please visit our website or follow us on Twitter for more details. Our Twitter handle is @integrate_care. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Renee Marcus-Hoden is the Deputy Director of Community Catalyst Center for Consumer Engagement and Health Innovation. For the past 20 years, Renee has worked to bring the consumer perspective to the forefront of health and health innovation. Renee?
Thank you so much, Alana, and welcome to everyone participating in today's webinar. I'm really thrilled to be here today. As Alana mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director of the Center for Consumer Engagement in Health Innovation. Among our priorities is to promote health equity for underserved populations in all efforts to transform the health system. So I'm really thrilled to be working with the Lewin Group again and the Medicare-Medicaid Coordination Office again to bring this webinar to everyone. Some of you may have participated in last year's webinar on culturally competent long-term services and supports, which is available on the Resources for Integrated Care website that Alana mentioned before. And today's program will be a wonderful companion piece to that one. So before we hear from our great lineup of speakers today, I'm going to first take a few moments to introduce them and to also offer our participants a roadmap for our time together today. We'll begin with Maria Elena Del Valle. Maria Elena is a workforce innovations consultant with the Paraprofessional Healthcare Institute, or PHI, which is based in New York City. In that role, she works closely with employers who are implementing innovative strategies to recruit, train, mentor, and supervise direct care staff. She also works with direct care staff to develop leadership, advocacy, and mentorship skills. With her expertise in organizational development, participatory management practices, and leadership skills building for managers and workers, she's really a perfect person to start our conversation today. Maria Elena is going to give us an overview of the population needing long-term services and supports today, the direct care workforce, and then share information from the cultural competence training programs that PHI has developed. We'll then jump all the way across the country to hear from our next speaker, Andrew Adams. Andrew is the Chief of Staff at Homebridge, a home care agency located in San Francisco. As Chief of Staff, Andrew serves as a key strategist to the Executive Director and provides senior leadership and capacity building to support and further the mission of Homebridge. He holds responsibility for organization-wide communications, marketing, grant development and fundraising, legal, policy development, administrative staff, and board relations. During his presentation, Andrew will introduce us to Homebridge's client population and to the population of direct care workers, who they refer to as caregivers. He'll also share more information about the cultural competence training Homebridge offers and the types of strategies they employ to recruit and retain a diverse workforce. I'm particularly excited to share that Andrew is joined today by Melanie Moorhead, who is a caregiver at Homebridge. Melanie has been a caregiver for over 31 years, working with clients to help them thrive in their communities. Melanie has been with Homebridge since 1999, first as a caregiver, then as a support and retention coordinator, providing peer mentorship, and currently as a specialized training coordinator. In that role, Melanie utilizes her caregiving skills to work with clients transitioning home from long-term care facilities. She coordinates with the client's medical team to develop a discharge plan, acquire the necessary equipment, and train fellow caregivers on the specialized care that her clients and their clients require to successfully return home. We'll be hearing directly from Melanie a bit later in the program. So I first wanted to thank you all for being with us today, great speakers. And then next slide, please. Let's talk about our learning objectives. So here are the learning objectives for the session. By the end of today's webinar, participants should be able to recognize the diverse needs and preferences of duly eligible beneficiaries for culturally sensitive direct care services, such as communication, food, and physical touch. They should also be able to identify strategies direct care workers can use to meet the cultural and linguistic needs, values, and preferences of diverse beneficiaries. And finally, they should be able to identify the key elements of training that direct care workers get in cultural competence. So let's go to the next slide. This is our agenda for today's program, which should track what I mentioned earlier when I was introducing our speakers. So we'll start, as we typically do, with some polls to get a sense of who is in the audience. We'll then have presentations from Maria Elena and from Andrew, and then we'll bring Melanie in to join the conversation in a panel discussion and to hear about her own experiences working with diverse clients. Following that discussion, as we always do, we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers from all of you. And then finally, we always like to make sure to ask you to stay on to complete a brief evaluation of the webinar. Next slide, please. Okay, let's get started with our polls to understand who's with us today. Again, these are the polls that we typically take, so anybody who's been on one of these webinars before will find this familiar. So the first poll is, in what setting do you work? And you can choose the one that is most appropriate for you, whether that's health plan, ambulatory care setting, long-term care facility, home care agency, community-based organization, consumer organization, academic or research setting, or something completely different. So I'll give everyone just a few seconds to fill that out. Again, pick the one that's most appropriate for your setting. Okay, let's go take a look and see who's with us today, what settings they work in. Next slide. Okay, so by far, the majority of our participants work in some capacity in a health plan, followed by another, which we'll have to do a little more digging to find out. And then we have a good representation from community-based organizations as well. Let's find out a little bit more about, now that we know what setting you're in, what your professional area is. So again, which of the following best describes your professional area? And you can choose one, and again, these may not be precise, but choose the one that best describes it, whether you're a health plan case manager or coordinator, health plan customer service, administration or management in a health plan, healthcare administration of some sort, if you're a provider of one sort or another, a direct care worker, the topic of today's webinar, if you're in pharmacy, social work, advocacy, policy research, or something else. And again, I'll give everyone a chance to weigh in. Okay, let's take a look and see who's out there. Okay, so again, because we had most of our participants from the health plan sector, it looks not surprising that most people are in health plans, but specifically care coordinators or case managers, nearly 40%, 17% in health plan administration or management, and a good chunk from social work. Okay. Terrific. We're very excited to have such a diversity of folks with us today. So now I'm going to turn things over to our first speaker, Maria Elena Del Valle from PHI. Maria Elena, take it away.
Thank you, Renee. And thank you, everyone, for choosing to participate in this webinar this afternoon. Let's begin by looking at the diversity of the population using long-term services and support. Today, more than 15 million Americans rely on long-term services and support. The need for long-term services and support is particularly important to the dual-eligible population, with nearly half of the 12 million beneficiaries relying on long-term services and support. Working-age adults, those between ages 18 and 64, with personal assistant needs, currently outnumber older adults aged 65 and above at 7.7 million versus 7.2 million people. However, the balance will shift as the population grows older in the coming decades. About 60% of long-term services and support users are women. Due to the longer life expectancy for women, this gap can be expected to widen as the older population adds more women than men over the decades ahead. The need for long-term services and support varies among racial and ethnic groups. So, like, for example, among the older adult population needing long-term services and support, 78% are white, 9% are black, and 8% are Latino. 6% are of another race, including Asian Pacific Islanders. The diversity of long-term services and support population is expected to grow. Only a small subset, approximately 677,000 of the 15 million living at home with long-term services and support needs, reside in rural areas. Next slide, please. Let's continue to now look at the direct care workforce. There are about 4.4 million workers, including over 2 million home care workers, 600,000 nursing assistants employed in nursing homes, and 1.6 million workers employed in other settings, including residential care facilities, assisted living facilities, continuing care retirement communities, and hospitals. The direct care workforce is projected to grow by 30%, from 4.4 million to 5.8 million within the decade. Next slide, please. Let's look at some key figures about this workforce. 87% women, the median age is 41. 50% are people of color, and 25% are immigrants. Next slide, please. Let's take a closer look at two words that we will be hearing throughout the webinar presentation and that have been already stated: culture, cultural competence. But let's look at what is the definition. Let's look a little bit more closely at what is the definition of cultural competence in healthcare. Cultural competence in healthcare is the ability to provide high-quality, person-centered care for and with those who may be different from you. So as the growing diversity within the population using long-term services and support grow, as well as that direct care workforce grows, it increases the opportunities for cross-cultural interactions in these settings. And these interactions often involve a variety of factors, including race and ethnicity, language, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. So as these cross-cultural interactions increase, how do we do this? How do we strengthen these interactions and communication? I want to offer you these thoughts. Awareness and respect for clients' uniqueness, beliefs, and preferences is an important tool in delivering person-centered care and navigating the territory of cultural competency. So when we think of awareness, we look at what is the personal inner dialogue that we're having when we meet someone that's different from us. What are those assumptions and biases? This is very key to improving your interpersonal skills. Once you become aware of these inner dialogues and you get stronger at communicating with other people, this self-knowledge will support you to develop more and have more respectful communication. Without this self-knowledge, it can be harder. This applies across the board. Next slide, please. In order to provide cultural competent care, direct care workers need to be able to meet individual needs and preferences related to these concerns, such as communication, verbal and nonverbal. For example, in some cultures, looking at someone in their eyes is a sign of respect, and in other cultures, it could be considered disrespectful. Let's look at food. One might think, what could get complicated in serving cereal for breakfast? Well, in some cultures, people eat cereal with cold milk. And in other cultures, people only eat cereal with hot milk. Imagine if you're used to having a bowl of cereal with hot milk and someone serves you a bowl of cereal with cold milk. This can create a very distasteful breakfast experience. Some Caribbean cultures consider serving cold food insulting. One might ask, why would it be insulting? Why is that insulting? Well, because warm food symbolizes intentionality and care that goes into preparing food. Physical touch. Some Orthodox Jews are not allowed to shake hands with any women except their wives. There is no formula for how to work with a client from any given culture because every person is unique, and that person's relationship to the culture is unique. Next slide, please. I want to share with you a little bit about PHI's vision, mission, and commitment. PHI is a non-for-profit organization based in Bronx, New York. For the past 25 years, PHI has been working closely with direct care workers and their clients in cities, suburbs, and small towns across America. PHI offers tools necessary to create quality jobs and quality care. Let's look at the trainings. PHI offers specialty training to direct care workers on topics such as Alzheimer's and dementia, congestive heart failure, diabetes, enhance, observe, record, and report. PHI's trainers and researchers and policy experts work together to learn what works and what doesn't work in meeting the needs of the direct care workers and their clients in a variety of long-term settings, and support policymakers and advocates in crafting evidence-based policies to advance quality care. Advocacy. PHI has led advocacy efforts to extend wage and overtime protections to home care workers nationwide, and to create an advanced home health aide role in New York. In our curriculum design, we have a core curriculum for entry-level personal care aides and home health aides. We also create curricula that support the advanced roles in long-term care and promote continuous learning and curricula on leadership development and team building. Next slide, please. I'd like to highlight 2 training programs that PHI designed for individuals and organizations to use. The first is a specialty training associated with the Home Care Aide Workforce Initiative, HOWI. This training consists of 4 modules. We begin by exploring our relationship to culture. We ask the participants to share examples through personal stories about cultural components from their own culture. Then we looked at respecting an individual's unique perspective. And these include the following topics: identify differences from someone in the same culture, explain how generalizations about a culture do not always apply to individuals from that culture. And we explain how we will share some common needs, which are similarities, but how we want these needs met can be different, which is our uniqueness. Some key skills to demonstrate respect for differences include communication, looking at sender and receiver. Nonverbal communication, which is so important to be aware of your own body language. We all know that often our body language arrives before our words. People can hear our body language before they hear our words. Be aware of your client's body language. What is that client's expression saying when I'm looking at them? We explain, and then we go to the module on applying our learning, which is a lot of practice and application on how to use communication skills, how to pay attention to nonverbal cues, practicing paraphrasing, asking open-ended questions, and pulling back to build trust with a client who is different from them. We look at and explain how to show respect, gain understanding, resolve misunderstandings, and more effectively, how do we manage these challenging and confusing situations that involve a client who is different from us. We also provide additional tips about nonverbal communication in different cultures. These 4 modules are particularly important for direct care workers to meet the diverse needs and preferences of their clients. Next slide, please. The second training program, which is generally known as PHI's signature program, is Coach Approach to Communication. Here are some core skills that are covered in this curriculum. Active listening. This requires listening from the speaker's perspective. We also look at the verbal and nonverbal. So, for example, a direct care worker from a Caribbean island was participating in a training, and she said that she entered a client's home with dementia and says, "Good night." The client goes to bed, and the direct care worker wonders why her client always goes to sleep when she arrives. Well, when she shared this example in the class, the other direct care workers asked her, "Why do you say good night when it's only 6 p.m.? And she says, "In my country, when the sun goes down, we say good night." Listening from the speaker's perspective, as I mentioned, is very important. And one of the tips that we offer often in the class is, how do you know when you stop listening to someone? Well, when you are talking with someone and someone is speaking with you and you start to have a conversation with yourself about what the person is saying to you, you have stopped listening. Another skill is paraphrase. Paraphrasing for fact and paraphrasing for feeling. When you do this, it affirms to the speaker that you are listening. It demonstrates interest. And it helps often to identify a client's need, concern, or issue. An example, a client says to a direct care worker, "I'm not feeling like myself today. This time of year reminds me of the smell of crayons, pencils, and notebooks." During the session, we ask the participants, if you paraphrase the fact, what would that sound like? If you're paraphrasing for feeling, let's hear what that sounds like. And the important thing is, if you don't paraphrase and you don't catch important information, like the smell of crayons, pencils, and notebooks, you may have missed an opportunity to engage in a conversation and learn more information about the client that you're serving, and you may have missed a very important, meaningful connection. Because if you paraphrase and you say, "Mrs. Gonzalez, you're saying that you're not sounding like yourself today," and you're also saying that this time of year reminds you of crayons, pencils, and notebooks, Mrs. Gonzalez might respond, "Yes, it reminds me of when I was a school teacher. I miss teaching children," which will lead to conversations, more for future conversations. Let's look at pullback. This is what I call pause for the cause. Often in interactions, even with people we know, we say or someone does something, or we may do something that will trigger someone. And the challenge here is to gain emotional control, right? Because When we get triggered, we know we cannot control other people. We could only control ourselves. So when you gain emotional control, you're able to put your attention back on a client. A client is going to a salsa dancing activity, and a direct care worker put sneakers on her. He got upset and he yelled, "What are you doing? I need my brown special dancing shoes." Well, the direct care worker could be triggered by the gentleman yelling at her, saying, "What are you doing?" And she would have to pause for the cause and say, "I'm here to serve the client. What is it about these special shoes? What is it about the brown shoes?" So she will put the focus back on the client, and it will lead to maybe paraphrasing, or another skill that I'm going to now talk about a little bit is asking an open question. Why do you need these brown shoes for salsa? And that will most likely lead into a conversation about what is so critical about these shoes when you're going to participate in the salsa activity. Effective questions are always important. Some are closed because we need to get facts. And the open questions open conversations. They also cultivate effective working relationship. Next slide, please. I'd like to invite everyone to participate in this activity. There will be an opinion poll. We're going to do a poll question. I would like to read a scenario and ask you to select the response that makes the most sense, or that describes what you think is happening. Scenario 1, a client says to her direct care worker, "Carmen, when you're at the drugstore, can you buy hair conditioner for me?" Carmen, the direct care worker, responds, "You need a deep conditioner. You have what my mom would call bad hair." What's happening in this scenario? Please check the one you feel best describes the situation. Let's look at the responses. So I see that D, Carmen isn't really thinking about what she is saying. Her mind is elsewhere, was a popular choice.
So Marilena, this is Renee.
39%.
This is Renee. It looks like the top choice actually is A, that she's unconsciously being insensitive to her client's feelings. And then down at the very bottom, Carmen's unaware that she's expressing a racial stereotype and bias. Those seem to be the highest percentages. Maybe you can comment on that.
Yes. Thank you, Renee. So a little bit about this backstory, and this, by the way, is a real true scenario. Two women of different cultures with similar hair texture, different cultural responses to managing their hair, an assumption that all people with thick, coarse, curly hair understand that the term bad hair is intended as an endearing and playful way to say curly hair requires extra care. This difference led to misunderstanding and confusion. As I just mentioned a few seconds ago, this is a real scenario, and the client filed a grievance stating the following: I don't want Carmen to take care of me anymore. She was rude, disrespectful, and discriminated against me. The worker stated, I didn't mean to offend her. I have thick curly hair too. In my family, we call it bad hair. It's a playful way of saying it's going to require extra care. I hope she gives me an opportunity to explain. Carmen's desire to resolve the confusion led her to what I describe as the learning path to cultural competency. Next slide. Let's look at the second scenario. Jessica, a home care worker, is going to meet a new client, Mrs. Singh. Mrs. Singh for the first time. When Jessica comes to Mrs. Singh's home, she opens the door. She introduces herself and she smiles. She steps in. Suddenly, Mrs. Singh starts yelling, "You are so rude. Get out." What's happening in this scenario? Please check the one you feel best describes the situation.
So again, this is Renee. It looks like we have a few choices. Is she being insensitive to her client's home environment? Is she not really thinking about what she's doing because her mind is elsewhere? Is she unaware that Ms. Singh's religion prohibits wearing shoes in the house? Is she just being friendly when doing her job? Or is she unaware that entering the client's home without permission is disrespectful? So if people can make their choice, and then we'll go to see what the results were. The next slide. Okay, why don't we look at the results, and then we'll turn back to Maria Elena to tell us what was really going on here. Okay, I'm not seeing the results. I'm not sure if we can get those up.
Renee, it looks like on our end I can see that about 2/3 of folks thought that Jessica's unaware of entering a client's home without permission is disrespectful, and that Jessica was unaware that Ms. Singh's religion prohibits wearing shoes in the house. Those look like to be the most common responses. I don't know if I can turn it back to you, Maria Elena, to comment a little bit about that and about the scenario.
Yes, and those two responses are on point. And to share a little bit more about this backstory is that it is against Mrs. Singh's religion to wear shoes in her house. She has told the agency that all aides must take off their shoes before entering the house, that they should bring slippers or shoes that have never been worn outside and to leave them in Mrs. Singh's house. So this is it's a small scenario, but it's so important, right? Because here is someone who's very well-intentioned and maybe had some assumptions about when you go to someone's home, you smile, you say hello, and you just walk in. And what this points to is that home care workers should be aware that acting on any assumptions they may have about clients can result in a negative consequence. This is usually a deeper story than what is revealed in the care plans and even in the first visit. So we definitely encourage in our trainings that it's important as a first step to become aware of your assumptions, and for the second step to explore the assumptions by asking the client questions or to explore a little bit about their story, his or her story. Thank you for participating in those two scenarios. Next slide. When I started to talk about the two, when I explained or offered the two scenarios for us to do a little practice, I mentioned learning path to cultural competence. The learning path to cultural competence begins with awareness. Having an awareness of your client's unique personal needs, including general knowledge about their culture, is an important tool and first step in providing individualized, person-centered care. Once you become aware, it leads down to the path of responsiveness. Showing respect will help you gain understanding, resolve misunderstandings, and more effectively manage challenging or confusing situations. Carmen demonstrated respect by asking to meet with the client and to try to resolve the misunderstanding that resulted in hurt feelings. The client met with Carmen and agreed to reestablish a working relationship. And competence begins when you realize that differences can show up in any area of caregiving, such as verbal and nonverbal communication, health-related beliefs, food choices, housekeeping preferences, family relations, and systems. Next slide.
Marilena, this is Renee. We need to move on to Andrew, and what I'd love to have you come back later on and talk a little bit more about how we apply that learning path to cultural competence to those two scenarios with Carmen and with Jessica. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to have Andrew pick it up from here, and like I said, we'll come back during the question and answer period to hear a little bit more about the application. Thank you so much. Let's move on to Andrew.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Maria Elena. Hi, everyone. This is Andrew. As Renee mentioned, I'm at an organization called Homebridge. We're based in San Francisco. Homebridge began in 1985 as a nonprofit advocacy organization focused on ensuring that underserved populations receive in-home supportive services in a culturally competent manner. Since 1994, we've been providing direct in-home care to some of the most vulnerable residents of the San Francisco and the Bay Area. Next slide, please. Our client population's very interesting. We annually provide care to about 1,500 clients, about 75% of whom are dual eligible. Homebridge's client population is 30% under 60, and we're increasingly seeing that our client population is skewing younger as our services are being utilized as an eviction prevention measure to help keep younger in-home supportive services recipients housed primarily in single resident occupant dwellings. Next slide. And one more slide, please. As you can see from this slide, Homebridge's clients are predominantly female. About half are racially, ethnically diverse. While we note that our client population is 2% transgender, we believe that this is really an underreporting and that our transgender population is significantly higher here in San Francisco. Next slide. Our caregivers, as Renee mentioned, we refer to our caregivers as we refer to our direct care workers as caregivers, and Homebridge employs about 350 caregivers. 83% are female, and over 90% are racially and ethnically diverse. In the past 5 years or so, we've seen a significant shift in our workforce with a doubling of the number of new caregivers who are 25 or younger, termed as transitional age youth. What we've observed with this is that generally this transitional age youth population has little to no work experience, and as a result requires a lot more direct cultural competency training than the older population of caregivers. Next slide. Because we serve such a diverse client population, we also require a diverse caregiver staff to meet the client's needs. And so recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce is challenging. And on this slide, you'll see some of the tactics we use to assist in this endeavor. It starts with accessibility. We make sure that our marketing materials, our applications, the job descriptions are all available in multiple languages. We're really proud that our supervisors and team members speak over 25 languages. And it's also important that we honor lived experiences. You'll see on the slide there, we do target populations with barriers to employment, which means we also need to employ a workforce development team. We're a fair chance employer. One of our most effective recruiting sources is by advertising ourselves as a fair chance employer. This means that we are actively recruiting people who are previously incarcerated and even recruit in jails and prisons with people who are shortly being released. Because we work with vulnerable clients, some convictions do prevent us from hiring people, but overall, we found that this population is incredibly reliable, hardworking, very compassionate, and appreciative of the opportunity to work. Also note there that honoring lived experiences includes hiring caregivers who are reflective of our client population and communities, and we make sure to use preferred names and pronouns. Next slide. We found providing barrier removal support, that workforce development that I talked about, and job coaching to be very effective. One of the things I wanted to call out on this slide is that we provide prepaid transit cards to our caregivers. Transportation in San Francisco, as is around the country, is very expensive, and we know that the majority of our caregivers commute by public transit to come to work. And so we want to ensure that just getting to work is not an additional barrier for our caregivers, and so we do provide prepaid transit for them. Staff development is another important area for us for retention. As you can see on the slide, we have an employee referral program where we found that the majority of our new caregivers are actually find Homebridge through other employees. We offer peer mentorship, and potential employees are also offered an opportunity to attend a 4-hour professional development workshop. Homebridge understands the importance of supporting new employees entering the workforce by providing them the foundation of exploring key elements to long-term success as a caregiver. The goal of the workshop is to offer a voluntary pre-employment opportunity to learn more about Homebridge, learn more about their role in our organization, and to learn different types of communication styles, discovering various career options that exist at Homebridge. Ongoing professional development workshops also are provided to our caregivers who are already our employees. Lastly, we offer continuous training opportunities, and this is one of our most important points when we recruit staff. In addition to CPR and first aid, our most popular training classes that our caregivers take are what we call specialized trainings. These are classes such as dealing with bed bugs, how to handle clients who hoard, handling challenging situations, how and when to report abuse, how to deal with substance abuse that consumers and clients are doing, and understanding mental illness. Importantly, we offer these trainings in English, Spanish, and Cantonese. So next slide, please. I want to talk with you around the challenges we've had of recruiting culturally competent caregivers. In San Francisco, like around the country, the cost of living is very, very high, and unfortunately most direct care workers are low-wage workers. About 18 months ago, Homebridge developed the STEPS program. It's an acronym for Skills, Training, and Employment Pathways. We did this to create 3 levels of caregivers within Homebridge, where each successive level indicates having gained important new skills and also earning more money. It also indicates working with more challenging clients who have more complex complex care needs. In the past 18 months, over half of our 350 caregiver workforce has progressed at least one step, if not more. And today, we've had over 12 caregivers in the past 18 months be promoted to higher roles within the organization. So they've advanced through the 3 caregiver steps we've created into peer mentorship roles. And importantly, over 25% of our care supervisors, these are people who supervise caregivers and do client management for our clients, over 25% of our care supervisors are former caregivers. This is a huge shift for Homebridge. Before we redesigned this program, the care supervisor type role was made up primarily of people who saw themselves as case managers and who had MSWs. This has also resulted in higher retention, better client care, being able to provide a career growth pathway both inside and outside of our organization. Next slide. Importantly, as I mentioned before, we do a lot of our own training, and this training is done on site. Homebridge over the years has really designed and privileged the concept of adult-centered learning. And adult-centered learning for us is really using and honoring the adult learning cycle. What this means is 4 things. One is that we focus on having direct experiences. So we structure the learning experience by using small groups, offering case scenarios as we just did in this webinar, and doing role plays. Secondly, we make sure that we're reflecting on the experience. So we help learners focus on key points and sharing ideas and reactions with others. Third, we generalize about the experience. We help guide the learner to new insights based on their experiences and discussions. And lastly, we apply what's being learned. We try to coach the learner by providing feedback, advice, and encouragement. You'll see there that we talk about the modules that develop these soft skills necessary for cultural competence, including respecting differences, conflict resolution, and communication. Homebridge employs a philosophy of care not only in our trainings, but in our interactions with our clients and with each other in the office, called Motivational Care Management, or MCM. MCM is a competency-based community support practice model that promotes consumer-centered care, culturally responsive care, a strengths-based approach, and a results-driven approach. Next slide. In our training modules, we talk about what culture is, and we define culture as unique behavioral patterns and lifestyles that differentiate one group from another. So for example, a set of values, beliefs, or views that are transferred from generation to generation. Oftentimes they're manifested in daily life and routines and activities, or they're reflected in legends or drama, art, religion. We also importantly discuss ethnocentrism, which is, as Maria Elena was talking about, the evaluation of other cultures based on the values and customs of our own culture. It's important that we, in our trainings, talk about diversity and cultural competence, really having an ability to interact effectively with people of different cultures. So what we teach is that first you have to have an awareness of one's own cultural worldview. What is my culture? What's my worldview that I'm bringing to the situation? Second, an attitude towards cultural differences, being open to learning and being respectful of differences. Third is knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews and cross-cultural skills. And lastly is developing cultural competence results in an ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. Next slide. So Homebridge caregivers are trained to care for diverse clients in a variety of ways. And I've, on this slide, given 3 examples. So the first one is, being in San Francisco, we do have a good number of transgender clients. These clients sometimes have not gone through the process of legally changing their name. And so when we first receive them as a client from the Medicaid system, their name may be different than what they would prefer to be called. And so we have developed a system internally where we can update the care plan to reflect their preference. The second example I have is, as I mentioned, all of our clients are Medicaid, or here in California, Medi-Cal recipients, which effectively means they're poor. But that has not necessarily been their lived experience for their entire life. And nor does being low income mean the same thing for everyone. And so we teach we shouldn't make assumptions about socioeconomic status. Third, we take confidentiality and our adherence to HIPAA very seriously. At the same time, we know that in some cultures it is common to involve family when making health decisions. So we want to make sure, and we teach, that seeking the client's consent and permission before including family is important, but at the same time, including family for some clients is really important, and if we don't do that, we can come across as being rude or insensitive. Next slide. So when we talk about client outcomes, there are a couple of ways in which Homebridge assesses this. We do assess clients every 1 to 4 months, depending on the complexity of that client's needs, and we're really proud of the results that we've had. We know that from the point at which a client is first referred to Homebridge to 4 months out, that, for instance, we see a 46% reduction in 911 calls. We see a 44% reduction in emergency room visits and a 51% reduction in missed doctor's appointments. These are all important health metrics that we measure. And I think going back to the cultural competence piece that feeds into that, one of our clients said, Homebridge really understands me. Before Homebridge, I had providers who didn't speak my language, didn't respect my decisions, and didn't try to know me. My caregiver is absolutely wonderful and has saved me from having to move from my home.
Andrew, thank you for that. That was a wonderful place to end. And I wanted to go back and thank you both, Maria Elena and Andrew, for giving us some real solid background about the people who need long-term services and supports, the professionals that care for them in their homes, and also the essential elements of cultural competence training that you both do. So as promised, we're now going to bring Melanie Moorhead into the conversation in order to dig a little bit further into what this looks like on the ground, so to speak, or in the homes, and dig into her experience providing direct care services with cultural sensitivity. So, Melanie, welcome. And I think I'm going to start with you. We'll bring everybody into the conversation, but let's start with you, Melanie. So during his presentation, as you just heard, Andrew talked about the cultural competence training at Homebridge, and you took that training. So if you could just say a few words about what stood out for you about that training and what you learned that perhaps you didn't know beforehand.
Good afternoon on your end. Just basically the client's cultural needs, their preferences, and how to treat all clients with respect. Mm-hmm. We learn by asking questions in an effective way, to learn more about our clients. Homebridge also helped me understand how to set personal and professional boundaries. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Instead of asking the clients why, they need certain or preference met, I asked, more about religion, cultural background, to learn more about them. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, this provide better care for my client in a professional and respectful manner while maintaining professional boundaries.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Andrew, if it's okay, I want to turn to you on this point and just pull the lens back a little bit. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to what Melanie shared, maybe around the professional boundaries, personal and professional boundaries that she mentioned?
Yeah, I'm glad Melanie brought up professional boundaries because that's an important part of our training, and we try to provide guidelines for maintaining healthy relationships with clients. There's a fine balance to be had where caregivers need to be really intrinsically curious about their clients, but also respectful and cognizant of not digging too far into their personal lives. So our training curriculum helps define and explain culture, diversity, ethnocentrism, and discuss how to recognize the assumptions we make in our daily lives and how to see when folks are exhibiting behavior that indicates they may not be comfortable with the conversation where it's going.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the explanation of that fine balance. So Marilena, I wanted to bring you into the conversation as well as we just talk a little bit more about training and ask if you might be able to share some information on what training on cultural competence in other long-term services and support settings looks like. So we're talking about assisted living or a long-term care facility. Could you share a little bit about what that might look like?
Sure. For the most part, the concepts we cover in cultural competency training are nearly identical, right? But the difference is really about ongoing support. In home care settings, they may have less on-site support for direct care workers because other staff are usually not with them in the homes. On the other hand, in the institutional settings, they may have more organizational support available for direct care workers. And so that gives them the opportunity to hardwire cultural competency training throughout the larger organization. And something that home care agencies do and others may consider doing is to offer an evening support group for direct care workers to do a peer exchange, to share common experiences about their challenges and to provide support for them.
That's a really helpful distinction. And then actually your comment about organizational support reminded me of the webinar that I mentioned at the start of our program today, the one we did last year on culturally competent care. And we featured an example of an assisted living facility for first-generation Japanese-American older adults. And I recall that in that training, or in that webinar, they described the training that they provide to staff, but the director also talked about their ability to provide kind of, on-the-spot in services. So she mentioned, when they notice a staff member who might have missed a cultural cue. So I actually think that that's a really good example of the kind of on-site organizational support that you were talking about, Marilena. So thank you for that. I'm going to shift gears now to talking about how we get to know and understand client needs and preferences. So Melanie, I'm going to turn back to you and ask you about that. So, when you're assigned a new client, how do you get to know them? And, maybe you get information ahead of time and then you gather information yourself when starting up with the client. If you can talk a little bit about that, that might be helpful.
It usually starts with the supervisor, who gives us basic information, including name, address, and preferred pronouns. When meeting my client for the first time, I always greet with a smile, explain who I am and why I'm here, and ask for permission to enter their home. Once I enter, I observe. Look around, might be different types of paintings, artifacts, and I notice something, and I'll ask them, can they explain this piece of art to me? And usually they'll explain it. Might be passed down from generation to generation. And I always want to learn. Learn about your client, learn about their culture, their history. Some of the artifacts might be related to a specific religion. I will ask them, could they explain, their preferences related to their religion.
Yeah, that's a great example, and it really does also highlight what you mentioned earlier about those boundaries. You sort of asking kind of open-ended questions to get them to talk and show curiosity without crossing the line into something that's too personal. So thank you for that. Let's actually go to some concrete examples. So Melanie, if you can share some of the experiences that you've had in caring for diverse clients and some of the strategies that you used in those situations to make sure that you were being respectful of that person's needs and preferences and values. So can you tell us about one of your clients?
Yes. One of the supervisors gave me an assignment to go to. When I went to the client's home, his wife answered the door. I introduced myself to her and told her my reasoning to be there. She explained to me that her husband's English language was, his skills were, wasn't that good, but she would interpret it for him. Diagnosis of the client, he had fallen and he suffered traumatic brain injury. Client and wife explained that they were Muslim and they kept a halal household. They explained to me which stores to go to and what type of meat to purchase. I asked them, once she gave me the directions and what she wanted me to purchase, I asked her, I reflected back and said, this is what you would like for me to purchase and this is where you would like for me to go. She told me yes. Once I did my shopping for them, I was finished for that shift. I reached out to shake her husband's hand, and she explained to me that in their tradition, no physical touching by opposite gender. And that was a learning experience for me because I didn't know that much about the Muslim community.
That's a great example, and I think reflects a little bit on some of the concepts you talked about earlier. Andrew, if I could actually bring you in at this point and just ask you to again pull the lens back on that example and talk about how those strategies come from some of the Homebridge training.
Certainly. I should mention that we're really proud that Maria Elena came to Homebridge several years ago and trained us on the coach approach that she talked about. And Melanie demonstrated how we implement that coach approach perfectly. So she talked about using open-ended questions to learn more about clients' preferences, and importantly, doing that paraphrasing, mirroring back the client's request back to them to ensure that she understood the request completely.
Thank you. Thanks for drawing all those connections. Melanie, I'm going to come back to you again and ask you to share another story about one of your clients and how you met their cultural competency needs.
My supervisor gave me a client. The client was male-born, but she was transgender. So when I met her, I knocked on the door. She asked who it was. I told her my name was Melanie from Homebridge. And she said, come in. When I arrived, she had on, she wore a wig and she had on women's lingerie. I asked her at that point, what would you like for me to call you? And she said, Miss Stephanie. She said, that's what everybody calls me. And from there on, that's what I called her. And till this day, whenever I see her, I say, hi, Miss Stephanie.
Oh, that's great. And again, I'm going to ask Andrew to sort of pull back that lens and talk about the context of that situation. I think you mentioned a little something about this earlier, but can you talk about the preferred name versus what's on the forms?
Certainly. I did mention before that here in California we have Medi-Cal as our state Medicaid system, and often the name that and that's how we get our clients is that information is shared through that system. And so often in these situations, the name that's present in that state database may not match how the client presents and how that client would like to be called. So interactions between the caregiver and the client are important to identify and document any changes to preferred names and pronouns. And so we both teach our caregivers to be cognizant of that and respectful of that, and then also so that it's not just a one-time thing, to either change that in our case management system or to report that back to their supervisors so that they can do that. And we've actually created an alias field in our database so that any new staff member interacting with that client can see that while their legal name may be something else, they prefer to be called by this name.
Great. So it sounds like you've got both training and infrastructure in place to support your clients that maybe have, a gender or sexual orientation differences, however they prefer. So that's very respectful, and again, it's born out of the infrastructure you've put in place, including the training. So I'm going to actually turn it back to Maria Elena. We started our session today with you providing us with an overview of cultural competence training, and you've just heard Melanie describe some of her experiences as a direct care worker. And just hoping that maybe you can bring us home by reflecting a little bit about what you heard and how it connects to what you talked about earlier.
Yes. First of all, I want to say thank you, Melanie, for those incredible two examples, and also to Andrew for representing all the hard work and commitment that has to go into doing this work well, both on an organizational level and then supporting the direct care workers the way that you all do in Homebridge. But in Melanie's example, it really highlights the qualities that direct care workers need to serve diverse populations. It also helps to track back to the learning path to cultural competency I talked about earlier. The awareness, the honesty, and responsiveness are very important guiding principles in providing quality when we're doing person-centered care. It's the need to be aware of oneself and also of the client at the same time is really what allows us to navigate these unknown moments and these unpredictable moments. So to be honest and to ask about your client's preferences when you're unsure, the way that Melanie did, when that was a great example with the Muslim family and finding out what was necessary. And just by the way you could tell, Melanie, that you were so present and doing the nonverbal listening of paying attention to facial expressions and paying attention to important information on how to serve that client. And to be so responsive in the second example that you gave with the transgender, and I can tell the sincerity and if this is what you prefer to be called, this is what I will do. So this really supports a lot of what PHI's vision and mission is, that quality jobs lead to quality care. And I'm sure that those clients of Melanie, they must be so appreciative of your commitment to provide person-centered care the way that you do. So training direct care workers to pay attention and respond to their clients' unique needs and preferences leads to moments where clients show the appreciation of care they have received, like the examples we just heard. This helps to build trust between direct care workers and clients in a very meaningful way.
That's great. It really sort of emphasizes, you've underscored this issue of, relationships. And, when you're talking about being in someone's home, it really is this very, intimate relationship that I think, requires the kind of training that we've talked about today and the kind of attention to issues that we've talked about today. So I want to take just a moment to thank you all for the conversation. It was really terrific to hear from you, Melanie, from, your grounded experience. And we're going to shift gears now, and instead of me asking questions, we're going to take questions from our participants. So I'm going to turn the program back over to Alana, who's going to moderate the Q&A section.
Great. Thank you so much, Renee, and thank you so much, Maria, Elena, Andrew, and Melanie for your insight into cultural competence and direct care. So we now have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Thank you all who have submitted your questions already. Please submitting them. If you have any questions, you can submit them using the Q&A feature on the lower left of the presentation. If you type your comment at the bottom of the Q&A box, and you can press submit to send it. So I will start with a question. Let's see, I'll start with you, Andrew, but I'll turn to the others as well. How do you train Homebridge caregivers on how to meet needs and preferences around clients' holidays?
That's actually a really interesting question, because at Homebridge, we do, 3 years ago we started a program called Homebridge for the Holidays. And it is a program where we identify our most isolated clients and provide a meaningful gift for them during the holidays. One of the things we were really cognizant of and then realized we needed to train on is that when we do this during the holidays, many clients have many different cultural practices during that time. There's Hanukkah, there's Kwanzaa, there's Christmas, and then there's clients who don't celebrate anything during that time. And so we realized that for our caregivers, they would lead oftentimes with a Merry Christmas, because that's what they're celebrating. And so we needed to reinforce these principles that we've been talking about, and to make sure that when we go out and give those gifts to our clients during the holiday time, that we are saying the appropriate holiday greeting for that client and what they celebrate or don't celebrate. And sometimes that means we're just giving you a gift during kind of a dreary winter time because we're thinking about you, and that's a nice thing to do too.
Thank you, Andrew. And Maria Elena, anything to add on your end about the type of training that you provide direct care workers in general on holidays of clients?
We don't provide a specific training like on holidays, but I definitely agree and support what Homebridge is doing around this. And what I have seen by way of activities to help cultivate awareness, and I've seen this in some of the assisted living, they do an incredible calendar giving like background on holidays and suggesting language on how to greet one another. So I think like those visual cues also help to, do that in the moment education of, what do people prefer, what do people like, what do we need to be aware of.
Thank you. Melanie, I'll turn to you. Do you have any examples of ways in which you've understood or been able to respect your clients' holidays and celebrations around holidays?
Yes. Here at Homebridge, we have a few clients that are Jehovah's Witnesses. And Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't celebrate any type of holiday, or birthdays. So, and you can usually when you go into a client's home, you may see that they have their literature around, and you basically, if being raised in a Christian background, folks, your parents would tell you, about Jehovah's Witnesses. And, sometimes I ask if, how long have they been Jehovah's Witness, and they tell me, and I say, and I understand, about their background, and I don't push. And sometimes they ask me about my religion, and I tell them, and they don't push on my end either. So we respect each other on both ends.
Thank you, Melanie. Andrew, I'll direct this one to you. When you're hiring caregivers, is there anything that you look for to ensure that you're hiring caregivers who are open to serving clients from diverse cultures and may come in with some cultural competence already, or are open to learning more about serving clients with diverse needs?
Yeah, certainly one of the most important attributes we look for is having a caregiver who, or a potential caregiver who has that sense of compassion and curiosity about other people. And so we actually have very few job requirements. Sometimes we hire people who haven't been in the workforce at all, especially with the TAY population. Other times we hire people who have been caregiving for 30 years but are looking for a different environment. And across those populations, we make sure that the kind of one job requirement that we really do follow up on is that ability to empathize and bring compassion to the job. We find that those things, if one is exhibiting those, then they are really receptive to the cultural competency trainings that we do in our new hire trainings.
Thank you, Andrew. Melanie, we had a question just asking you to talk a little bit more about some of those professional boundaries that you learned about in your training. It sounds like that was very helpful for you in your role in going into clients' homes. Can you say a little bit about what are some of those things that you learned that were most helpful for you?
Just learning, just being respectful. Asking open-ended questions, or reflecting back on what was said from the client, just to make sure we have a clear that I have a clear understanding of what they were trying to say to me, and also in what being respectful. Respect is the number one thing. Being respectful, having patience.
Thank you, Melanie. Maria Elena, I wanted to turn to you to reflect a little bit about the example with Carmen, the direct care worker who was one of the scenarios that you shared. Can you talk a little bit about how Carmen moved along that learning path to cultural competence that you mentioned? So from her initial awareness that her bad hair comment was offensive to her client to then taking action to become responsive and competent. Can you share a little bit about that process along her path of learning to be culturally competent?
Yes, I think that example also is about intent and impact. I happen to be working directly also with that organization as a consultant, and, that process, the way that worked out is that they had someone who facilitated the conversation, right? They followed up from the grievance department to get both perspectives of, like, how did this happen? Because they did have a good working relationship, and so they wanted to explore and see if there was any way that both were willing to meet and talk, and they both were. Carmen became very aware, and she was open to, like, it was important for her to be able to say, and for people to hear where she was coming from, that she had a good intent, and she was shocked at the impact. So for her, I remember her saying, "I'm never going to forget this. I'm going to pay attention," and realizing that one's intent doesn't always end up the way that one imagined. But her willingness to say, "Look, I didn't mean it, but it doesn't have to be the end of this working relationship. I really enjoy serving you, so let's talk about this. I want to apologize." And also became aware that even though they may have similar hair, it doesn't mean that people understand these terms. So it was like a big eye-opening process, but I love that her awareness led to action, which she took initiative. I really want to stay with this client, and I think the client was very impressed with her wanting to talk and said, well, then I'm willing to talk with her, and that actually had a good, was a good outcome for both. And I since heard that has improved their working relationship. They do check in with each other.
Thank you so much for reflecting on that. Andrew, I want to turn to you and ask a little bit about how you support Homebridge caregivers who may experience discrimination or racism from clients and how you support caregivers in those experiences.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. As Melanie was referring to in professional boundaries, this is an area where having really good professional boundaries is important. And so, unfortunately, from time to time, there are clients we serve who do mistreat our caregivers along those lines. So we teach and train our caregivers a couple ways to respond to that. One is to recognize that this person, the client, may not be fully cognizant of what they're saying and the effect it has on them, to try to depersonalize that, to have compassion for that person in that situation, and to help them learn and grow of why their comment is hurtful. Sometimes, though, the situation can't be rectified in the moment. And so we also train our caregivers to, it's okay if a situation's unsafe, to stop services and leave the client's home and contact their supervisor. At that point, our supervisor will go out and meet with that client, have a frank conversation, and I'm happy to report there are times where we've been able to kind of rectify that relationship. And it's a real learning experience for everyone involved. And in the extreme cases, there are times where it's simply just not safe for our caregivers to go back to that person's home. And so we have to let the city and county of San Francisco, who's our funder, where we get our clients from, know that we can't provide services for that person any longer.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Maria Elena, you talked a little bit about some examples about paying attention to clients' nonverbal cues and how important nonverbal communication is. Can you provide an example on some of the strategies or things to look for that you might suggest training direct care workers on around nonverbal cues?
When we do this session in communication about nonverbal cues, we do practices we do role plays on active listening. And so the demonstration role play intentionally focuses in a lot on the nonverbal so that people can see what is it that we're talking about here. So somebody will be speaking, and the person in the listening role will first demonstrate poor listening, which is the eyes, there's no eye contact, there's looking everywhere, kind of, very preoccupied, and people look at that and say, wow, that was not nice. They'll even say to the facilitator, I don't think I'm liking you very much right now. If we have two PHI facilitators, the one who's doing the poor listening, people kind of like take issue with them for about 10, 15 minutes in the beginning of this exercise. And then we do a second take, which is demonstrating active listening, paying very close attention. When people see this difference, they naturally start sharing stories about, oh my goodness, I have to really pay attention to my client. I saw myself when you were doing that role play, and I realized that I really need to stop and make sure that they know that I care and that I'm listening, and I don't want to miss important information.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena. Melanie, I want to ask you, do you have recommendations for other direct care workers on strategies that you found helpful, either for reading clients' nonverbal, their body language, or other signs that have come up for you that have been helpful? Any recommendations for other caregivers in similar roles?
Usually when we have our new hiring, the caregivers that are going to come on board, me and my counterpart, we always explain to them about some clients. We have a client who when he gets agitated, he has a tattoo on his right hand, and it's a tattoo of a swastika. When he gets agitated at the caregiver that the care supervisor sent out, he'll, point at the tattoo, and, some of the caregivers, I said, this is where your patients come in at, because some of our clients are impaired, and your patients try to understand. If you feel uncomfortable, that's where you step out and call your care supervisor and let them know so they can make contact with our client.
Thank you so much, Melanie. So we are at time. I really appreciate everyone for submitting your questions. If you have additional questions or comments, please email ric@lewin.com. And thank you, all of our speakers, for answering all of those questions that we were able to get to during our presentation time today. For more information on the direct care workforce, you can visit phinational.org and the Resources for Integrated Care website. You can also explore other continuing education credit opportunities through the RIC website on other topics related to integrated care for dually eligible individuals. The slides for today's presentation, a recording, and a transcript will be available on the RIC website shortly. And as a reminder, additional guidance about obtaining credits, accessing the links to the post-test can be found within the Continuing Education Credit Guide in the resource guide on the left-hand side of your screen or at the Resources for Integrated Care website. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today for this presentation. Please complete our brief evaluation of our webinar so that we can continue to deliver high-quality presentations. If you have any questions for us, please email us at ric@lewin.com. Again, thank you so much, Maria Elena, Andrew, and Melanie, for your presentations and participation today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our conference for today. Thank you for your participation for using AT&T Executive Teleconference. You may now disconnect.